It's a surprise, Marilla. We're going with my mom, my husband said confidently as he walked through the door. I looked at him, completely shocked. He was smiling, but his mother stood behind him with a smug look on her face. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. This was supposed to be our honeymoon, just the two of us. The last thing I expected was for his mom to come along. I didn't know what to say, but before I could respond, my husband's smile turned into a frown, and he asked, "What's wrong? Aren't you happy?" Of course, I wasn't happy. He should have known better. I had complained to him many times about the bad relationship between me and his mom. She didn't like me, and I didn't like her. She felt like I had taken her beloved son away from her, and every time we met, she would make sarcastic comments. But when my husband was around, she acted like the perfect mom. He never believed me when I told him how difficult she was to deal with. And now he was bringing her on our honeymoon? What was he thinking? I asked him if he had already booked her flight and hotel room. He looked confused and said, "I thought I'd do it later." I raised my voice in frustration. It's impossible to get reservations at the last minute during peak season, especially since we booked ours so far in advance. He just snorted and said, "Then give us your ticket." At first, I didn't understand what he meant, so I asked him again. He repeated himself, clearly annoyed. "If my mom can't come, then give her your ticket. I paid for the trip, so I have the right to decide." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My mother-in-law was standing there, looking smug and pleased, and I was completely stunned. How could he think this was okay? This wasn't just any trip. This was supposed to be our honeymoon, one of the most special times in our lives, and now he wanted to invite his mother? I wouldn't even want to go on a regular trip with her, let alone our honeymoon. As I stood there, still trying to process what was happening, I could see my mother-in-law was clearly happy that her son was putting her first. She seemed pleased that her presence was more important than our special time together. "Come on, hurry up. There shouldn't be a problem since I paid for it," my husband said, his voice impatient. Did he really think that just because he paid for the trip he could do whatever he wanted? As I thought about this, the cost of the trip popped into my mind, but it didn't make any sense. Money didn't change the fact that this was supposed to be our honeymoon, not a family vacation. By the way, my name is Marilla. I'm 33 years old, and I work at a company run by my father. When people first heard about me working there, they thought I only got the job because of my family, but I worked hard to prove myself, and soon, people started to respect me. Even so, there are still some who gossip about me because of my family's business, and it does hurt sometimes. But in moments like these, I've always been able to count on my husband, Dorian, to support me. Dorian and I are the same age. We worked closely together as colleagues before we started dating, and he's great at his job. My father noticed how hard he worked, and when we told him we were getting married, my dad was really happy. He said to Dorian, "I've heard good things about you. Take care of my daughter." Dorian smiled and replied, "Of course, I'll make her happy." That moment made me feel so proud, and I knew that my dad was thinking about passing the business on to the next generation. Some people even thought Dorian might be the next president of the company, though my dad never said anything directly. We often had conversations about business management over dinner, so we knew it might happen one day. Dorian's father passed away years ago, and his mother lives alone in their family home. Dorian loves his mom deeply. When we were dating, if she needed anything, he would drop everything and go help her right away. Since she raised him by herself, I always admired his dedication to her. I supported him, happy to see how much he respected her. But things changed after we got married and started living together. I began to have doubts. Dorian's usual line became, "I'm going to see Mom for a bit," and every week, he would go visit her. I started to feel concerned, so I asked him, "Is your mom sick? Is everything okay with hers?" He reassured me, "No, Marilla, don't worry. It's just important to spend some time alone with her sometimes." At first, he said this in a kind way, but lately, his tone had become less patient and more dismissive. One Monday morning, as my husband was humming a tune happily, I asked, "Are you going to your mom's house today?" The change in his mood was instant. He stopped what he was doing, took a deep breath, and asked, "Why do you say it like that?" He looked irritated, which surprised me. I had only asked a simple question. I shrugged, thinking maybe my tone had sounded a little accusatory, even though I didn't mean for it to. He glared at me and said, "It's already been said. Mom is lonely by herself. I go because you have trouble getting along with her. Understand?" His words made me upset. Yes, it's true that I had issues with my mother-in-law, but it wasn't always this way. At first, I really wanted to appreciate the woman who had raised the man I loved. I sincerely tried to be kind and understanding toward her. But from the start, she didn't return those feelings. She saw me as the woman who took her son away. The first time I met her, she was cold. As soon as Dorian left the room, her friendly expression changed. She looked me up and down, sizing me up like I was someone unworthy of her attention. "So, you're the president's daughter?"
"You don't seem like much," she said.
I was shocked at how different she was when Dorian wasn't there. She didn't stop there. She went on with more hurtful words. "You dare to show up here after stealing Dorian from me. Don't think for a second I accept you." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Then, as if to emphasize her harshness, she made a rude slurping sound with her tea, not even offering me any. When I nervously called her mother-in-law, she snapped, "Don't call me that. It's unpleasant." I was completely confused. Why was she being so hostile, especially since we had just met? Every time I tried to say something, she immediately shut me down. I felt helpless, like nothing I could say would make a difference. Soon, I heard Dorian's footsteps approaching, and suddenly, her attitude changed. She smiled sweetly, offered me tea, and acted like nothing had happened. "Sorry, I forgot to offer you tea," she said, laughing lightly. When Dorian entered the room, he noticed and asked, "Mother, you didn't serve the tea yet?" "Your fiancé is so charming," she replied, smiling. Then she turned to me and said, "Marella, feel free to call me mother-in-law anytime." A chill ran down my spine. It felt like a twisted game. From then on, my mother-in-law kept saying hurtful things to me, but only when Dorian wasn't around. It was like she had two different sides to her. But no matter how many times I tried to tell Dorian what was happening, he never seemed to see her true nature. Whenever I talked to him about it, he just brushed it off, saying, "My mother would never do that." He added, "If you're that uncomfortable, you don't have to meet her." He never believed me. At first, I tried hard to explain, but eventually, I got tired of him always defending his mom. So now, I only visit her when it's absolutely necessary. Dorian probably thinks I hate her. "Make sure to lock the door when you leave," he said one day. And just like always, he left without looking back. I tried to call out, "Wait," but he was already gone. His figure blurred as tears filled my eyes. After our argument about his mom, he hasn't been coming home much. Sometimes it feels like his mother is more important to him than I am. But despite all the issues with his mom, Dorian is a great husband. He helps me when I'm stressed about work and even does his fair share of the house chores, even though he's busy with his own job. At least he agrees that we don't need to visit her more than necessary. I thought about all of this as I flipped through travel brochures, trying to distract myself. I wanted to shake off the negative thoughts and focus on our upcoming honeymoon. I was excited about this trip. It would be a chance to forget about his mom for a while and enjoy some time just the two of us. I began thinking about possible destinations. Since Dorian had just become the team leader for a new project, I figured it would be a nice opportunity for us to treat ourselves to something a little luxurious. But then I remembered what Dorian had said. "I left all the planning to you, but I want the payment to come from my account." I had wanted us to split the cost of the honeymoon, but he just laughed it off and didn't want to listen to my suggestion. It felt like everything was always on his terms, and I was starting to wonder where my own opinions fit into our relationship. It didn't feel right for him to pay for everything, so I decided to cover part of the costs myself. Being the president's daughter, I knew my mother-in-law's sarcastic comments about spending too much would only get worse if I didn't. Just thinking about that made me smile a little. I was determined to stay positive and focus on what mattered. Just as I made up my mind, my mother-in-law popped back into my thoughts. Enough of this, I told myself. I pushed those thoughts aside and focused on preparing dinner for my husband, who would be home soon. Then the morning of our honeymoon arrived. I was busy getting things ready when the doorbell suddenly rang. I rushed to answer it. Yes, come in, I said, opening the door, but what I saw shocked me. There she stood, my mother-in-law, dressed in flashy clothes and holding a large suitcase. Before I could even process what was happening, my husband peeked out from behind her and said, "Mom, you're early." He smiled at her while she didn't even look at me. I stood there, completely confused. I asked, "Early? What do you mean?" Just as we were about to leave for our honeymoon, I saw her suitcase. What was going on? Was she planning to stay at our house during our honeymoon? The thought troubled me. My husband, looking pleased, then happily announced, "It's a surprise. Mom is coming with us." I couldn't hide my shock, and a strange noise escaped from me. "What are you thinking?"
I asked.
"Wait, what does this mean?" I was still in disbelief when my husband, full of excitement, repeated, "It's a surprise. Mom is coming along." As I stood there completely confused, he proudly put his arm around his mother's shoulder and added, "It'll be more fun with Mom." My mother-in-law smiled smugly at me. I couldn't believe what was happening. I asked, "Wait a minute, isn't a honeymoon supposed to be just for the couple? Shouldn't we have at least discussed this beforehand?" I tried to stay calm, even though I knew I wasn't wrong. But my husband didn't seem to understand why I was upset. Why can't we see eye to eye? I thought. To make matters worse, my mother-in-law seemed to be enjoying my discomfort. She hummed to herself as if she was pleased with the situation. I couldn't believe this was happening on the day we were supposed to leave for our honeymoon. "Why would you do something like this as a surprise?" I asked angrily. My husband responded, "It's fine because I paid for everything, right?" He frowned when he saw the shock on my face. "No, it's not fine," I said, realizing that his offer to pay for the trip wasn't really meant to make me feel better, but to avoid complaints about bringing his mom along. "That's not going to work," I objected, which made both my husband and his mother look unhappy. "Why won't it work?" he asked, while my mother-in-law taunted, "Mirella doesn't want to travel with me, does she?" I felt a headache coming on. "That's not the point, Dorian. What about your mom's plane ticket? Is the hotel booked?" I asked. My husband looked confused. "I thought we could book it later," he said. "That's impossible," I raised my voice. "When do you think we booked our tickets and hotel? There's no way you can book flights and hotels now, especially during the busy holiday season. The hotel we chose isn't too fancy, but it's decent, and it's fully booked." As I continued explaining, my husband said, "Then can you give us all your tickets?" For a moment, I didn't understand what he meant. He repeated, "If there's no ticket for my mom, then give me yours. I paid for the trip, so I have the right to do that." I was stunned. My mother-in-law looked smug, and I was left in complete disbelief. What was I hearing? My husband went on, "My mom went through the trouble of getting ready, so I've decided it'll just be the two of us. We can go on another trip with you later." I couldn't believe how easily he chose his mother over me. What was he thinking? I thought. "It's okay if I'm not there," I said again, feeling defeated. This is supposed to be our honeymoon, just me and my husband. I couldn't accept handing over our plans to my mother-in-law, who had appeared out of nowhere. My husband kept insisting that his mom had prepared for the trip, but none of that mattered. If he wanted to keep the peace, she should step back. Yet I was shocked as he continued to pressure me to give up.
"Come on, hurry up," he said.
"There shouldn't be a problem."
"Since I paid for it," he said.
I felt a headache coming on and sighed deeply. Actually, I had planned to keep this a secret, but I couldn't anymore. "My father is the one paying for this trip, not you," I said firmly. "So it doesn't make sense for you to demand the tickets." My husband looked completely confused, like he couldn't believe what I was saying. He had thought he paid for everything, which was why he felt so entitled. "Why would your father do that?" he asked, surprised. I stared at him coldly. "My father paid for the honeymoon as a gift, so we could save money for our future. He even told me to keep it a secret because of your pride." My husband's face turned bright red with anger as he shouted, "Why did you keep this from me?" Both he and my mother-in-law were stunned to hear that my father had covered the costs. As I listened to my husband's angry words, I felt my patience running thin. I had put up with my mother-in-law's behavior for far too long, and my husband always siding with her was the last straw. "If you two want to go on the trip, Return the money to my father and make your own arrangements, I said coldly. Cancel the reservations and pay for it yourselves. Without waiting for a response, I grabbed my bags and left the house. This was no joke. It wasn't right for them to use my father's money. Since I had handled all the bookings, everything was in my name. I quickly canceled the flights and the hotel, then got into a taxi. Instead of heading to the airport, I told the driver to take me to my parents' house. When I arrived, dragging my suitcase behind me, my father was shocked to see me. After I explained everything, his face turned red with anger. What kind of story is this? Is this some sort of joke? He fumed. The constant calls from my husband only made him angrier. I was furious too. This whole situation made me realize what I needed to do. Dad, I'm thinking about getting a divorce, I said, my voice steady but filled with emotion. My father calmed down, and instead of saying anything, he gently comforted me, stroking my back. I'm sorry, Dad, I whispered through my tears. He held my hand firmly, offering his support. The next day, my husband showed up at my parents' house with a box of sweets as an apology. I was about to turn him away at the gate when my father stepped in. If you're thinking about divorce, we need to talk properly, he said. Let's hear what he has to say. Even though I had planned to consult a lawyer, I decided to follow my father's advice and let my husband in. As soon as my husband saw my father, he started apologizing right away. I felt annoyed seeing him act innocent in front of my dad as he kept saying, sorry. I sighed, and my father asked me to take him to the sitting room. My apologies for causing trouble, President, my husband said, bowing his head. He often called my father President, even in private, claiming it had become a habit. But when he did, he always seemed to slip into a businesslike attitude. His practiced apology felt fake to me. What exactly are you apologizing for? My father asked, sighing. He was just as frustrated as I was. My husband just kept saying, I'm sorry for the trouble, over and over. It didn't feel like an apology to me. It felt more like an insult. When he tried to explain himself, I cut him off and handed him the divorce papers. Do you know how to fill these out? I've already completed my part. Please look it over, I said calmly but firmly. My husband turned pale as he stared at the papers. Wait, Marella, divorce? He looked at me seriously for the first time since he'd arrived. I've always come second to you, Dorian. That should be fine, right? You have your mother. I was ready to handle this like a business deal, refusing any attempts to patch things up. What are you talking about? Why bring my mother into this? He protested. She was excited about the trip too. We can go on another one together, Marella. I was shocked by how little he understood. Another trip? What does that even mean? I replied, shaking and biting my lip in frustration. This was supposed to be our honeymoon. I couldn't believe how selfish and blind he was to the situation. What kind of husband brings his mother on a honeymoon? Where does that even happen? But instead of realizing his mistake, Dorian doubled down. It was just a suggestion to bring her. At first, you said there were no flights or hotels available, he said. I couldn't believe it. How could you even think that was a reasonable idea at the last minute? I asked. He still didn't get it. Dorian raised his voice, showing his anger. Are you saying we should send my mother back, even though she was looking forward to this trip? At that point, my father stepped in again, trying to calm the situation. Let's stop this now, he said, his voice steady. After a long silence, he shook his head in disappointment. Dorian, he said quietly. I'm really disappointed in you, Dorian, my father said, his voice full of frustration. Hearing this, Dorian immediately straightened up and addressed him as President. My father looked at him with deep sadness, his disappointment clear. After a long, heavy silence, my father asked, why did you choose your mother over Marella in a situation like this? The question hit Dorian hard. He started stammering, struggling to find the right words. Well, he was clearly nervous, sweating as he tried to answer. While Dorian could be assertive with me, he could never stand up to my father. My father continued, a honeymoon is meant for the couple. You could have taken your mother on a trip any time after that. Right? Didn't you say you loved my daughters? Dorian quickly shouted, I'm not lying. I just wanted to show my mother she's as important as Marella. His sudden outburst shocked me. My father looked at him sternly for the first time. Even if it makes Morella sad, is that okay? Dorian stammered again, trembling, before finally saying, I'm sorry. But the way he clenched his fists showed that his apology wasn't sincere. He was apologizing out of pride and humiliation, not because he truly felt sorry for what he had done. You're a capable person, Dorian, my father said, and for a moment, Dorian seemed relieved. But then, my father's expression turned cold and stern. But even if you're good at your job, a person who doesn't cherish their family can never be trusted. My father handed Dorian a pen. The gesture made Dorian visibly shiver with fear. You should not be apologizing to me, my father said firmly, pushing the pen into Dorian's hand. Shaken, Dorian turned to me, pleading desperately, Morella, please don't go through with the divorce. I'll change, I promise. He fell to his knees, clinging to my legs. I will prioritize Morella from now on, he vowed, but his words felt hollow. It was as if he was only saying what he thought I wanted to hear. Then, out of nowhere, Dorian said, Please, if we divorce, I won't be able to pay off the debts.
Debts?
I asked, confused. What are you talking about? I repeated the question, stunned by this new information. Suddenly, Dorian recoiled, covering his mouth, realizing he had said too much. He looked filled with regret, and my father and I just stood there, silently staring at him in disbelief. After a long pause, Dorian nervously began. Well, it's about. He hesitated, clearly terrified to continue. But when he finally spoke, the truth shocked us both. Dorian revealed that he and his mother had been confident that he would eventually take over as president of my father's company. Because of this, they had been spending recklessly, believing the company's wealth would soon be theirs. The reason he visited his mother so often was to indulge in a lavish lifestyle with her. The more I hear, the less I see any reason for you to stay married to this man, Morella, my father said, disgusted and too disappointed to say anything more. Dorian, realizing how serious the situation had become, started pleading again. Please wait. If we get divorced, how will I live starting tomorrow? His endless apologies began to sound robotic, like a toy stuck on repeat, almost comical in their desperation. That's not our concern, I replied coldly, waiting for Dorian to sign the divorce papers. There was no point in talking anymore, so my father and I quietly decided to have some coffee, not bothering to offer any to Dorian. In the end, the divorce was finalized without much trouble. My father hired an excellent lawyer, and the detailed diary I had kept helped the process go smoothly. We also requested alimony to cover the costs of the cancelled honeymoon. When Dorian's side asked for a reduction, my father immediately refused, and I couldn't help but laugh at how firm he was. Rumors of our divorce spread quickly at the company, and the atmosphere around Dorian changed completely. It became so uncomfortable for him that he decided to resign. Since it was his choice to leave, he didn't receive much severance pay. He had to use his small savings to cover the alimony and pay off his debts. Now, he's living a very modest life. As for his mother, she has fallen ill and is bedridden. There are stories going around that Dorian is working part-time jobs and asking former colleagues for financial help, but who knows if they're true. These tales have become jokes that people share at parties. As for me, my father has finally decided to retire, and with strong support from the employees, it looks like I will take over as president of the company. At first, I hesitated to take on such a big role, but seeing my father's rare moment of vulnerability, wanting to trust the company to someone reliable, gave me a new sense of determination. I now feel the responsibility to live up to his expectations. Though I was unsure about leading the company at first, it seems I've inherited my father's talent for management. With his guidance as chairman, the company's performance is steadily improving. With this new confidence, I've been getting more attention at various CEO events. I haven't thought much about starting a new relationship yet, but maybe the time is coming for a new chapter in my life.